right, so today we are looking at this Flagstone tessellation folded from a single sheet of paper of hexagons and triangles. And I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I've seen other people do it, because I'm going to use open triangles. See, they've got that open hole on the back. So we can have these elements spaced a little bit further apart. And in order to match the edge with the hexagon, I need to use a double open hexagon instead of the more normal open hexagon with closed triangle. So let's go ahead and grab our grid. I'm using a 32 fold triangle grid on a hexagon. And for that double open hexagon, so for a closed hexagon, I'd have my mountain coming straight to the corner. Open, I'd have it coming one up on the right hand side, and double open, I'll have my mountain coming two up on the right hand side, the valley one above. And if you're using a triangle grid on a different shape of paper and you're referencing your hexagon from the center, there's two ways to think about it. The first is pretty similar to what I just mentioned of having two spaces, like your mountain's coming two spaces up from the center. So two spaces out, two spaces out, two spaces out, two spaces out. And the other way to think about it is to have your puffy star shape with the parameters 2 in, 1 out. And so now I've got that puffy star. You can see that I'm going 2 in, 1 out, 2 in, 1 out. So this 2 in is why it's double open, and the 1 out is for the pleat depth of 1. And if you want to learn more about that hexagon shape and other hexagon shapes, you can check out my number line of hexagon twists video from a month or two back. And so we'll go ahead and squash this hexagon. We're making sure that all of our pleats stay in place, and they mostly do if you just press from the top. And we're going to go and fold this tessellation one twist at a time. Well, at some places we'll need to set up multiple twists to get another one into place, but we're not going to pre-crease. So we've got our grid and we are good to go. So when we look at this, we want to have those triangles right up next to the hexagon. And we can see on the back here, there's going to be this single width pleat. And then there's a structure that's like a triangle twist, a closed triangle, but it has an extra pleat coming out from it. So I don't have that third direction coming out this way. I have it splitting at the corner of the triangle to make two new pleats. So what I'm going to do is flip my hexagon over, and I need to set my spacing. So I'm going to fold a triangle on here, and I'm going to need the mountain to be on this grid line. So I've got that single spacing. So I'm going to open up, and notice how it looks like it's coming to that intersection, but when I open up, it actually goes to the next one over. That's why you always want to reference to exactly what you actually want. And I can go ahead and get these mountains in place. And notice how I pulled this over and then flipped it back to get that pleat. And I can go ahead and squash the triangle. And I'm going to go ahead and put in the next triangle before I do anything more with this one. So I can use the fact that this created a tube to help me reference my next twist, where I can say, okay, one spacing past the folded mountain is my valley, one spacing past that is my new mountain. And I'm going to be running this over, and notice it's running through the existing twist. Now what I'm going to do here is a compound wrap off of this corner of the triangle, which lets us come out one, overhang one, over this pleat, and we're going to split the pleat. So we've had our mountain coming out this way, we're splitting it just like it's a three-way intersection, only that third one is inside of the triangle. And then coming down here, I'll split it, make a three-way intersection of mountains once again, and I can lay this down flat and squash my new twist. So I can actually go all the way around doing this without causing any pleat overlaps, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'll rotate again with the tube pleat. And run my new pleat under the existing triangle. And at that overhang point, I'll split the existing pleat into a three-way intersection. You can see where that third one is inside the triangle, and then one down into the hole. I'll split again, creating that compound wrap that lets me lay everything down flat and squash. Now we'll see in other repeats around that we don't necessarily have to have the triangle bit on the hexagon side, and actually this will have a hexagon on either side. So having the triangle bit on the hexagon side isn't really meaningful because there's two hexagon sides and you've got to pick one. So we can have a little bit of free movement in the pattern where we can choose, like, okay, is this side going to be the triangle, or if I can get this to come back up, is this other side going to be the triangle, and those are going to be equivalent. But for now, we'll do them all exactly the same. So I'll go around and set up the remaining ones, moving a little bit faster because we've already seen this move twice. And squash. And rotate. And do it again. And I'm poking from the back here. It's often easier to poke from the back in these situations than try and grab and pull from the front. And here on this last one, I don't have as many references to use, so I'll use the trick I did with the first one of saying, okay, I know it needs to have a mountain that's coming one spacing away here. And I'm going to go ahead and set up. So notice I made the triangle with this pleat and the inner pleat. So outer pleat of one, inner pleat of the other. Set up my triangle. And I'm going to go ahead and put in my compound wrap. So I'll split the outgoing pleat And notice when I did that, I only moved it one spacing this way. So I'm basically shifting this pleat going out towards the corner, one spacing over, and letting that lay down, letting this lay down. I still need that compound over here. And when you look at it, this compound move actually is something really familiar. I think everyone starts folding tessellations with the Mira-Ori corrugation. And this is exactly the same thing. So, or rather, it's just one repeat of it. So then I can squash my triangle on top. And now we're going to flip back to the other side. I don't really care how I flip because I have exactly the same thing on all 6 sides of my hexagon. And we'll see that those compound wraps set up these 3-way intersections on the other side of the paper. And what we can do with those setups is fold our open triangle twists. Now, if we were to just flip this pleat over, we'd get a closed triangle. But what we need to do is move that mountain one spacing out over, and then we're putting the valley on the far side. So I'm shifting the mountain up, erasing the valley that was there, and putting the valley on the far side. This means that I'm going to be folding directly on top of that existing pleat. And when I squash, my edge of this open triangle should be exactly aligned with the edge of the hexagon twist. So rotating around to the next, I'll do the same thing, shifting the mountain over to set up that open triangle, folding the new pleat exactly on top of the existing pleat, and I'll get my new open triangle twist. And I'm going to go around and do this same move everywhere. This is not causing any pleat overlaps, so there's not any sequence of things that I need to do at this point. And this is the part of the video where everyone who's watching live is really glad that it's being recorded, because yes, I am moving quickly through this. And especially with flagstones, this is the kind of thing where you're going to want to see the techniques once just watching, and then attempt to fold it for yourself. And squash. Okay, so I've got my central hexagon and these outer triangles, and I'm going to need to set up my next hexagons and the triangles outside of those. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick a set of parallel pleats, and I'm going to work with these on my right, and I need to work with these pleats to get the next hexagon in place up here and the next one in place down here. So I'm going to choose to work with this one first, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a valley up through here, and it's going to have a mountain one further. And I can go ahead and say, okay, so I've pulled up this pleat so I can draw on things. I'm going to have this mountain, and I've got this 1, extra space here. And I know the corners of my twist need to line up with things. And since it's going to be a double open hexagon, what's going to be outlined in the middle with my mountain folds is this great big hexagon. And so I can recognize where all of my mountain folds need to go before I even start folding any of them. So what I'm going to do, this valley that comes through, I have options. I can run it through as a pleat overlap, and I'm free to do that because the corner of the twist will be right here. It's not going to cause any crunching of folds that are wrapped under this section. Or I can open that up and do a compound wrap, which is just generally nicer, less constricted. So notice that I've left the top plate completely flat, and I've done this Mura-Ori zigzag. And then I have another plate out through there, which I'm going to fold accordion style on top of with my next direction of mountain fold. So then I'll add in more of these mountain folds, and the tricky one is coming up under here. And on this one, I'm going to do a more normal triangle wrap with the pleat coming from the open triangle. So we can see that our mountain is coming out that way, and it's running into another mountain at 120 degrees. So I can split this top mountain at the point of intersection into a three-way intersection of mountains and tuck that pleat out of the way so that now this pleat doesn't run into anything when it comes down through. So I've got the compound wrap on top and the normal triangle wrap on bottom, or on the bottom. And I can go ahead and squash my nice big hexagon twist. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go around this way because that's actually going to be a bit easier for me. I've got the triangle wrap already, so I'll flip over and flip the pleat to squash that wrap. And I'm going to recognize that this is going to need some extra work. It's going to need specifically to be split and tucked in like this. But we're going to see what we can figure out before we do that. So flipping back over here, and really we want to kind of be aware of, okay, which way actually is going to be easier to fold. And in general, if you have a set of parallel pleats, you want to work from the shortest ones to the longest ones. And it's kind of hard to tell which one is shorter, which one is longer. I usually go by, okay, if I put in my next twist here, is it going to cause all of the pleat overlaps over the same direction, or is it going to run pleats through the center of existing twists? So we've got a bit of flexibility there. And yeah, let's go for it. Let's see what happens. Because this is feeling a bit more open than this, where we have that extra pleat that's tucked under the compound wrap. So this is going to require setting up both the triangle and the hexagon at the same time. Like I did for the first triangle, or one of the triangles, I want to say, had this valley that we needed to pop down, and we're going to do a triangle wrap. So I've got that valley, it's popping down, it's going one more spacing until it meets the existing valley, then it's running off as a three-way intersection of valleys, and we've got that three-way intersection of mountains sitting on top. And that is going to set up my triangle. But what I need underneath is another pleat coming out. And so this is caused by, okay, you see that pocket down there? I'm going to run a mountain along this fold and let this actually be a valley. So that is the popping motion that I'm doing there. And we could hold that flat and squash our new triangle. And that's going to be probably the most efficient way to fold that. So I'm not running the pleat all the way because it's going to pass through an existing twist, but I can hold it firm enough to squash, and that's good enough. Then I need to put in my next hexagon, and here's where the move is looking familiar from. I'm going to need that valley to pop down the pleat from the triangle, and this time I'm going to need that Mura zigzag to create a compound wrap. And down here I can also identify where this mountain is going to run by saying, well, the corner needs to be at the corner of the triangle, so there it goes. And notice here I opened the pleat, found exactly where the paper was underneath, and that is going to be a standard triangle wrap. And we can use that 2 in, 1 out, 2 in, 1 out, 2 in, 1 out, 2 in, 1 out to get the rest of our hexagon. And once that's in place, we can go ahead and squash. And we've got a bunch of wraps set up, so I'm going to go ahead and flip over and resolve some of them. So this one can be a triangle. This one, I'm going to go ahead and pop it up, so I've got this single wide over here, and I can squash this as a triangle this way or a triangle this way. It doesn't matter. I'm going to pick one and squash. And we've got a triangle wrap over here that I can squash. So now we were working over here. I'm going to flip back over, and I'm going to repeat those steps that I did to put in the previous triangle and hexagon. So I'm going to have this valley running up through, which I'm going to pop down and create that triangle wrap. So valley runs one past the mountain that was popped down, hitting the valley of that same pleat, causing a three-way intersection of valleys, which has a three-way intersection of mountains on top. And I'm noticing that I've got this mountain coming out here, this mountain coming out here. I need my open triangle, so my mountains need to surround a triangle hole. And actually, so this mountain here is not exactly the fold that exists yet. The fold that exists is coming out horizontal. So I need to pop that down to make this exist. And then one spacing up from that pocket, I'm going to pop over. So this is putting in that three-way intersection at the corner of this triangle from the other side of the paper. And just like we did last time, I'm going to hold this firm right here. I'm going to keep my finger on that so it doesn't slide, while this is very 3D, and then squash my new triangle. Now I'm going to set up the next hexagon. It is also going to have its valley come through here, and we're going to pop down this mountain. With the way that these two pleats are running into each other, though, we're going to need a compound wrap where I overshoot one, then zigzag. And then I'm coming down to the bottom here, opening up this top pleat to find the 2 in, 1 out. That's the corner of my hexagon, and putting in the triangle wrap down below. So you might be thinking, wow, this really isn't easy, and that's absolutely right. The Flagstone tessellations are well known as the more difficult ones. But I think it's totally worth it because we get to have this lovely pattern without pre-creasing. So we don't need to go in and use a crease pattern and pre-crease everywhere. We can just take a grid and fold it into whatever we want. So now it's time to flip over and take care of those wraps, those triangles that we had set up. Again, this one, I need to pop up from the compound wrap, make sure I've got that single wide tube structure, and then I can squash either side into a triangle. And coming around, this one was the normal triangle wrap, and there we have it. Flipping over, exact same thing again. So I'm going to move a little bit faster this time because we've already seen it twice. So I'm setting up this triangle. Notice this pleat direction I need to change to there, and I'm basically, so you see this valley running and hitting one spacing away from the corner of the triangle. That's exactly what we've been doing on these outer triangles to set up the hexagon. It's the same function here as well. And with that set up, we can squash our triangle. And look, again, that valley is running and hitting one spacing away from the corner of the triangle, and we're doing our zigzag over the top. And down here, we're opening up. This mountain is hitting, so this mountain is hitting right at the corner of the triangle, and we're going to split the pleat at the corner of the triangle to create that triangle wrap. And go around and set up the remaining pleats of the hexagon. And squash. Being very careful to keep our valleys actually on grid lines, as always. And one thing that can help keep your valleys on grid lines is holding all of the pleats flat while you squash. That just helps keep things from shifting around. And it's time to flip over and get our triangles from our wraps. This compound, again, we need to open up and get that kind of double-sided triangle and pick a side to squash. And we've got this one more triangle in here. And flipping over, I'm going to pop this down. I'm going to do the exact same sequence of steps once more. And then popping this down, we need the compound. So I've got that zigzag like the Miura-Ori to get that wrap. And down here, it's going to be the simpler triangle wrap, which in this case is going to cause a pleat overlap further down the line. And this other one will as also. And we get the rest of our hexagon in place and squash. And then we'll flip back over and squash some more triangles. Again, opening the compound, get these two three-way intersections of mountains, one spacing apart from each other, and we pick one to squash. And coming over, we can get our new triangle. Okay, so it's worth taking a look here at this messy situation because we're going to be running into it soon. And what we can do here, actually, is... Nope, that point stays down. Open it up into... Sorry, I just reordered something without saying what I was doing. Okay. So I've got that messy situation, and I popped it up so I could see those two three-way intersections. And what I'm going to do here is that second three-way intersection, I'm going to make a third one and a fourth down below, and I'm gonna make these pleats run through before anything else that's going on. I'm going to make sure this is folding down flat on top, and then I can fold through here, and that's going to let me squash this triangle in advance before I really need it to already be squashed. So that's a bit of tricky pleat management. Let's see if I can put it back and do it again slower. So what I had was this pleat going through first, and then I had a compound wrap in, let's see. So I'm looking at it from this side because this is the side that I arranged it on. I had this compound wrap with the pleat already going through, and then I had these two pleats from above. So all I did right there is backtrack to where I was before. Then flipping over, what I'm trying to do is pull out these two three-way intersections. And I'm making sure I'm keeping my hexagon in place. I'm finding those two three-way intersections. Notice that I've got my tube now. And I need to do another compound wrap underneath to help it lay flat. So I've got another zigzag section going on in there. And then my new pleats can fold closed on top of that. And I can squash the triangle on top. I went with the one kind of in the middle of my options. I could have equivalently gone with this one on the hexagon side. But either way, I needed to get that squashed and ready before I come around and do other things with this hexagon. And before I get to the hexagon, I'm going to need to do this triangle, get the triangle wrap on top, shift this pleat over, and pop that up so I can squash the new triangle. And once again, this is very 3D in here. It's not laying flat. And if it did, I would be adding a lot of new creases to existing twists. So from there, I'm going to pop this corner down and do my compound mirror ori zigzag around it. And I'm going to come in here. I'm going to pop this out. Since we already got that corner in place, I already have everything that I need there. And I can set up my remaining twists for this hexagon. And I can use the same trick of holding this down flat while I squash, but it's going to be a little bit easier to hold things if so that's going to be the corner of the hexagon, one spacing out, pop it down, wrap the pleat around, and set up this triangle. And I can either run this pleat through, creating a double depth pleat under here, or do a compound wrap around that pleat, however you want to manage that. So I've set up both a hexagon and a triangle, and I'm going to go ahead and squash them both. And there we go. Squashing them both. And flip over and take care of all of my triangles that I have set up on this side. Once again, anytime I have a compound wrap, I'm going to open that up to get that single width tube structure and squash. And that goes for this one as well. And squash. So that gets us around once more. And we've got this structure of 2 triangles and a hexagon being added in layers around the center. And we're going to maintain that structure. So even though technically speaking, the tiling is different, the tiling is actually the same as the one we're going to do next week, which is just rhombi. We're going to treat it as if it's a hexagons and triangles tiling, and just have all of those triangles with the extra plates on the back just hanging out, chilling, not causing trouble. Because they can act like triangles. They can have their plates going out parallel to everything else until we need them to set up differently. So I'm going to work my way around once more. It's actually going to be exactly this amount. They're both on the same amount of grid, 32 fold. And I'll finish out the border. And yeah, so this trick of using the bigger hexagon to allow us to use the bigger triangle is really applicable everywhere for all of these different tessellations. We saw it with the square flagstone. I don't remember if I showed it with the hexagons and the triangles as well, or I did show it with the triangles for sure, because it's in my window there. But this is applicable for all of them and can make it easier to fold. So coming on up, I want to put in my next triangle up here. And again, I'm not using this plate. I'm shifting it over and then coming and cutting back and setting up that open triangle. And you'll see in here I've got another plate kind of stuck in there. What I saw in the last time around is that I can actually get this fully set up beforehand, before I get all the way around. So what I just did is, instead of having this, I opened that up and did a compound wrap around. And I'm just going to choose the triangle closest into things to squash. And that will set me up well for when I get the rest of the way around. Flipping back over, I've got this 3D area that needs to be a hexagon. I don't have enough grid out here to pop down this mountain, or it would be actually this direction of mountain, but I can set up my hexagon, and I've got this corner in place, I've got this corner in place. I need another corner out here. And this is where I'm going to use that same technique that I had for closing the previous loop around the center of going ahead and setting up the next triangle at the same time. And here I can get that compound wrap to give me a little more space, a little more flexibility to lay things down flat. This is really wanting to run up into existing twists. But we don't have to have everything flat to squash. We just need to have it flat enough that we're confident that our valleys are staying on grid lines. Then I need to flip over and I can go ahead and resolve this little triangle here. Which is on the edge and a little bit harder to squash. Then I need to come in here and open up that wrap to set up this one. And that's going to cascade. I'm going to need to wrap here. And I'm even going to need to wrap the next one. And I can squash that and flip back over. Now, when I'm adding the next ring around, I need to come all the way out here, get this hexagon in the corner before I turn the corner. And so I'm going to need that next hexagon, and I'm really going off of matching the edges with the neighboring triangle. And this is going to more or less set up the little split on this triangle. So there's nothing more that I can do with that corner. And then I'll come down here and set up this triangle. It's a very easy setup because I already have the wrap. I can just pop that out. Of course, when I have more pleats going on, it's not going to be quite that easy. But this is what we're working with. And then out here, I need to open up the compound wrap that was down here. And this is going to set up. And again, I can either try and squash it now or set up the next triangle and get my wrap up top and get the compound wrap down below with that next hexagon. And that's going to give me a much more solid basis for squashing these two twists. So I'm balancing, holding things in place with squashing everything else, and getting these edges into place. So from there, I need to flip over and deal with some of my triangles that have been building up on the backside. Yeah, right on the edge, a little bit harder to get precise. And this one in particular is going to cause that cascade. So we're setting up that tube, which is going to need a wrap from the next and the next. And then we can come back and squash. And we're going to work our way all the way around like this. So here I'm setting up that very partial next hexagon. And then the triangle Looks real easy because it's right near the edge and we're not dealing with the overlaps that would have to be happening. And down here, I'm going to open up that corner, which is setting me up for another hexagon and triangle, and getting this wrap in place as well. Getting all of that firmed up. I can start squashing on either the hexagon or the triangle. And then I'll flip to take care of these wraps that are turning into triangles. And this one is going to cause my wrap cascade. Now, if you do this tessellation with more grid and you find that actually it's super hard to go this way around, go the other way around. See what happens. It's all experimental, after all. It's all about, like, how does this feel? Where is this pushing the pleats? Am I happy with it or no? And so you're free to try whichever direction around you like best. And I was actually pretty conflicted in the beginning of like, oh, which direction do I choose for this? Because it really wasn't clear. It's all about finding which direction works best for you. So I'm adding in that triangle and the bigger partial hexagon now. Working my way around, and I've got that 3D-ness. And yeah, welcome to everyone in the chat. This is definitely a challenging but fun one. And I'm glad that y'all are learning a lot from my videos. And I'm squashing these triangles. I did the cascade. And flipping back, I'm getting that very partial hexagon, which I'm really lining up with this triangle edge to find the pivot. And we've got 2 more edges to go before we get around to where we started. And bringing it in, getting the triangle here, which again is easy because we don't have more grid. And this hexagon is pointing a pleat straight down through here. So I'm going to set up its triangle as well. I get a triangle wrap out here. And I'm going to do this zigzag compound wrap out here, which gives me just enough space to have everything set up where I can hold the pleats flat while I squash. And get those 2 twists in place. And then flip over. and squash that corner triangle. I'm going to open up the compound wrap to make sure I have that single width tube. That's going to cause my cascade of compounds, and notice I've got an extra one down here because we are coming around to the end. This is the last side, coming around the edge and flipping over. I'm gonna pop that up so I can set up my very partial hexagon. And I get the easy triangle because of this number of grid spacings. And I'm going to be coming around in here, setting up my next hexagon. And I notice here that my next triangle is already well positioned because I had another compound in here already. So that's going to make my life easier for this squash. Yeah, this is the one time in tessellations where coming around on the final edge is actually easier than the previous edges. And flipping over, I can deal with this triangle. Ah, see, it was because I set up that triangle off of the first open triangle when I first started this time around. So that was already there, ready and waiting to receive the pleat. And now I have one final little partial twist, this little partial hexagon coming in and squash. And there we go. The easier way to fold this flagstone tessellation of hexagons and triangles alternating together. So that's what I've got for you today. Happy folding, y'all. And I'll see you next week when we're doing just rhombi. So happy folding.